9/11 is not a date that Osama bin Laden just picked out of a hat. 9/11 is a symbolic date in the Islamic calendar. The Crusaders were not launched because they just felt like waking up in the morning and going and converting a bunch of Muslims or beheading them. The Crusaders were launched to the Islamic Empire ended in 1924. The Islamic Caliphate ended in Turkey by President Ataturk, who was a secularist. He ended the Islamic Empire and he gave women rights to vote. He gave women a right to an education, a right to work, a right to choose a husband. He forbid women from wearing the hijab. He forbid men from wearing the beard. The Muslims hate him so much that they consider him a Jewish agent because...
Let's talk about one of the hardest and most misunderstood questions. Why many historians and some Christians argue that Islam as a historical system is not fundamentally a religion of peace.
So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to crunch 1,400 years of Islamic history in 5 minutes and make it as exciting as I can possibly make it. Because I hated history when I was a little girl. At this age, I appreciate history. And now I understand why they say those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In order for you to understand why Western civilization is very different than the Islamic world, you need to understand the history of Islam. When Prophet Muhammad supposedly revealed his revelation from the angel Gabriel that he is supposed to be the last of the prophets in the early 600s, he started preaching in his own city, Mecca. He tried to recruit friends and followers to be able to spread his religion. And he tried for 12 years and failed. And after 12 years, he was only able to recruit his immediate family and friends. So he decided, if I go to Medina, which was the Jewish hub of Arabia, the business hub where the Jews lived, if I go there and preach my religion to them, if they accept me, that will buy me respect and stature between my own people and they will accept me. So Prophet Muhammad started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament to make his religion more palpable to the Jews, to make it a lot similar. This is why you see a lot of similarities between Judaism and Islam. For example, Jews don't eat pigs, Muslims don't eat pigs. Jews pray a few times a day, Muslims pray a few times a day. Jews fast on Yom Kippur, Muslims fast on Ramadan. And this is why you started seeing a lot of good writing in the beginning of the Quran when Prophet Muhammad was saying all the good things about the people of the book. He took his message and went to Medina trying to recruit the Jews, talking about the people of the book, talking about how similar the two religions are. When they refused to accept him and follow him as the last of the prophet, that's when he turned against them and started killing them and started expelling them. That's when Islam went from a spiritual movement for the first 12 years of Islam into a political movement cloaked in religion after the year of the Hijrah, after Muhammad went to Medina and the Jews did not accept him. He became a military warrior and declared war on them and started expelling them. Jews and Christians became dhimmi, or second-class citizens. They were only allowed to stay alive and not be killed only by paying the jizya or the protection tax. So they had a choice: convert to Islam, or if you want to stay alive, you have to pay the jizya or protection tax, living as dhimmi in the Islamic nation. Christians and Jews could not ring church bells. Jews could not blow the shofar. Christians could not ring church bells. They could not pray publicly. Christians and Jews could not gather together and build new churches or new temples. And the way they paid the jizya or the protection tax was in a monthly ceremony where they would get together downtown and the Jew would kneel on his knee and hand his goods to the mullah, who would take the goods as the price for buying the protection. And in many areas, Jews and Christians were given necklaces to wear as a receipt that they paid their jizya or their protection tax. Jews considered najis under Islam. Najis is bodily fluid. Najis is garbage. Najis is dogs. Najis is dirty. So Christians and Jews were treated as second-class citizens. Islam continued to grow. As Islam grew, more people became dhimmi or second-class citizens. Jews and Christians were given identifiable clothing. The yellow star, which was given to the Jews that most people think is a German invention. It was actually an Islamic invention in the 9th century in Iraq by the second Khalif al-Mutawakkil of Iraq, who invented the yellow star for the Jews to be identified as they walked down the street. Because Jews were considered najis, if a Muslim man or a Jew walked on the same side of the street, the Jew had to cross the other side so the Muslim man can walk, so he's not dirtied by the filth of the Jew. Christians were given the zunnar, the belt, which most of you men are wearing right now. That was an Islamic invention for the Christians. Islam continued to grow. They went all the way to Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem. Christians couldn't ring their church bells in Jerusalem. The Pope in Rome in 1090 told the Christians, how could you sit idly by and allow your brethren to suffer like this in the Holy Land? You need to go liberate the Christians. You need to go help the Christians. That's why the Crusaders were launched.
Let's talk about one of the hardest and most misunderstood questions. Why many historians and some Christians argue that Islam as a historical system is not fundamentally a religion of peace. First, let's be clear. There are millions of Muslims today who are peaceful, generous, and deeply moral people. When we talk about Islam in history, we were not talking about individuals, we were talking about an ideology and the record of its expansion. See, from a historical standpoint, Islam didn't spread primarily through persuasion or peaceful preaching. It spread through conquest. Within a single century after Muhammad's death, Islamic armies had conquered from Spain to India, an empire larger than Rome at its peak. And this expansion wasn't defensive, as some modern interpretations suggest. It was driven by a religious and political mission to bring the entire world under the rule of Islam. The early caliphs believed they were carrying out jihad, not just as an inner spiritual struggle, but as a literal command to expand the faith by force when necessary. The Quran and Hadith contain verses that, in their historical context, were used to justify warfare against unbelievers until they submitted or paid tribute. Surah 9:29, for example, calls on Muslims to fight those who do not believe until they pay the jizya with willing submission. And while scholars debate whether these commands were temporary or universal, early Islamic empires clearly took them as ongoing. By contrast, Christianity's growth looked very different. The early church had no armies, no states, no swords, only witnesses willing to die rather than kill. Christianity spread through suffering, not domination, through martyrdom, not military victory. And that contrast in origins matters. It also maintained a system of religious hierarchy. Muslims on top, Jews and Christians as second-class citizens, pagans often given no protection at all. The idea of peace in Islam historically meant peace after submission, not coexistence on equal terms. So, when historians say Islam isn't fundamentally a religion of peace, they mean that its founding texts and earliest practices tie peace to submission, not freedom. Peace in the Islamic worldview wasn't the absence of war, it was the victory of Islam. By contrast, the peace of Christ is inward, a reconciliation between God and man that doesn't depend on conquering others. Jesus didn't send out armies, he sent out ambassadors. He didn't say, submit or die, he said, follow me and live. So when historians and Christians make that distinction, it's not to insult Muslims, it's to face the historical record honestly. Islam built an empire by the sword. Christianity built a kingdom by the cross. And those two ways of advancing truth couldn't be more different. So,
the Crusaders were not launched because they just felt like waking up in the morning and going and converting a bunch of Muslims or beheading them. The Crusaders were launched to liberate Jerusalem. And they were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin, took it back, and Jerusalem remained under Islamic control until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky. The Crusaders continued fighting Islam, and for 300 years they tried and failed. And by the 1300s, the Crusaders disappeared because they could not win against Islam. Islam continued to expand. They went all the way to Central Europe. They went all the way to China. They went to India. They conquered Spain. They changed the name of Spain from Spain to Andalusia. And they started, as they advanced, as they conquered more nations, more people paid the jizya or the protection tax. And this is how the Islamic Empire grew. It went all the way until they was stopped at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. 9/11 is not a date that Osama bin Laden just picked out of a hat. 9/11 is a symbolic date in the Islamic calendar. By the 1600s, Islam had covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, the Europeans were experiencing the European Industrial Revolution, where the Europeans were able to invent products on factory lines, where they are able to make money and sell products, which gave them the money to build a strong army in order to fight the Muslims. And that's how they were able to stop them at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. The Europeans started the pushback against Islam. They pushed them out of Europe. They pushed them out of all the way to the Middle East and North Africa. By 1924, the Islamic Empire ended. In 1924, the Islamic Caliphate ended in Turkey by President Ataturk, who was a secularist. He ended the Islamic Empire, and he gave women rights to vote. He gave women a right to an education, a right to work, a right to choose a husband. He forbid women from wearing the hijab. He forbid men from wearing the beard. The Muslims hate him so much that they consider him a Jewish agent, because they believe that his mother and her bloodline was Jewish, and that was the influence on Ataturk. By the time the Islamic Empire or the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic State ended in 1924, the Islamic Caliphate had existed for 1400 years, and it ended less than 100 years ago. By the time the Islamic Caliphate ended in 1924, 270 million people around the world were killed by Islam. 270 million. And we didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and there was nuclear weapons. All of these people were killed, butchered by the sword. The people in the world, less than 100 years ago, how many people knew this history? Please raise your hand. We in America have failed to educate our children about history. We in America failed to educate our population about history. Our children in high school, you take any 17, 16-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, and ask them about World War II. They can't even tell you what happened in World War II. For them, it's ancient history, and we still have our World War II veteran walking among us. That's how little we know of history.
So, let's take this one step further. Why do so many historians, sociologists, and even political thinkers believe that Islam will always have a hard time coexisting with the Western world, a world originally built on Christian values and later shaped by secular humanism? Well, to understand that, you've got to start with what both civilizations are built on. The Western world, for all its flaws, was founded on a biblical view of the human person. From Christianity came the idea that every human being bears the image of God, that conscience is sacred, that faith must be free, and that the state is not God. Those ideas gave birth to things like democracy, freedom of religion, women's dignity, and the rule of law. But Islam, from its very beginning, merged religion and state into one. There's no separation between mosque and government in classical Islamic thought, because in Islam, law itself is sacred. The Sharia isn't just guidance for private faith, it's meant to govern the entire public life of society, from politics and family to economics and even criminal justice. So when Muslims in history built empires, they weren't just expanding territory, they were expanding divine law. That's where the clash happens. Western civilization says faith should be a matter of conscience. Islamic civilization says faith and law are one. Society must submit to God's revealed will. The West believes truth can be debated. Islam, historically, believes God's truth has already been revealed and is not open for reinterpretation beyond certain limits. Now, here's what makes it even more complex. As the West moved from Christian roots to secularism, it kept the moral fruit of Christianity, equality, reason, tolerance, but often forgot the spiritual roots that gave those values meaning. So you've got a secular West that says, we believe in freedom, but we don't believe in absolute truth. And then you've got Islam, which says, we believe in absolute truth, but not in freedom the way you define it. Those two worldviews collide, not because Muslims and Westerners can get along personally, they often do, but because the philosophical foundations are radically different. One is built on grace and freedom of conscience, the other on submission and divine command. Many historians, from Bernard Lewis to Samuel Huntington, have pointed out that as long as Islam seeks to maintain religious supremacy wherever it grows, it will always have tension with societies founded on pluralism and individual liberty. That's not hate speech, that's just history and political reality. What the West is losing today isn't just its clash with Islam, it is its own soul. When a civilization forgets the God who gave it freedom, it becomes weak in defending what that freedom was for. And if the West ever hopes to stand firm, it'll have to remember the faith that built it in the first place.